Otto, and I'm a counselor and partner here at Crossroads Psychological Associates. And we are very fortunate tonight to have two school counselors with us. And what we're going to do is talk for the next hour or so about the mental health of our kids and parents as we continue to deal with the coronavirus pandemic and get back to school and try and create some sense of normalcy. So we'll take a minute and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Good evening. My name is Brad Bernstein. I am a therapist at Crossroads Psychological Associates. I'm also a school counselor. I work at a middle school in Baltimore, St. Paul's School. During the day, I'm working mostly with middle school students. In the practice, I'm working mostly with high school students.
And my name is Lauren Hanza, and I am a K through 5 school counselor at a Howard County elementary school. So I've been spending a lot of time with the little guys.
So thank you both for joining us tonight. What we're going to do is we're going to split this up into a few different parts. We're going to start by talking about our kids and our concerns for our kids right now. Start with a little bit about practical concerns because our practical concerns certainly impact their mental health, but then talk more about their mental health concerns. From there, we're going to transition to talking about parents and parents' mental health, how we can best be supporting our kids and taking care of ourselves, because if we don't take care of ourselves, we're going to have a harder time taking care of our kids. We're going to transition from there to some special cases, talking about things like ADHD, kids who are on the spectrum, and how we can best help them, other kids who might have 504s or IEPs, and then end with question answer. So if anyone has any questions that they want us to talk about at the end, please feel free to put those in the chat room. But let's go ahead and start with some of the concerns that our students have and that we have for the students. So Brad and Lauren, what are some of the primary concerns that you all are hearing from the kids you're working with?
Lauren, you want to go first?
Well, we said we'd open up with some practical considerations. So for us, what I'm seeing is some difficulty with engagement. And some of that is due to just the nature of how school is set up. Sometimes at home with kids, being in couches or in beds or things like that, where they're really not ready to learn. They're really kind of still sleepy or having trouble engaging with the teacher. Certainly not all engagement has to do with environment, but we are seeing some of that for our kiddos.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be such a hard thing, especially with the younger kids. What are some of the recommendations you've made to parents about how just to set up their space?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about finding, it really just has to be a corner too, but a place where they can sit up, have their computer at eye level, have their school supplies close by so that they don't have to go running around the house to find everything. We tell them to eat snacks in between sessions, so they're not snacking during sessions, and take potty breaks in between sessions. So a lot of it is just kind of how you're physically setting up your space, and then your time as well with food and drink and potty. I think I'm with the little guys.
Right.
I mean, for the older ones, I think developing that routine is really important, and that structure. I think it really becomes an individual preference and what type of workstation is best for the child. Some kids are okay in their bedrooms; they like the independence and they're very engaged and focused. Other kids can't do that and are distracted by everything else that's in their bedroom. So it's better to have them in a common place in the house, like the kitchen table, dining room table. So where there's traffic and you can kind of keep an eye on them. So I would, if you're not having luck where they are right now, I would consider switching it up and seeing if it works better somewhere else. And I think making sure students have a really a working organizational system, whatever that may look like for them. as long as it's working for them and it's consistent. They're not changing it every day. So whether they have a planner they can write in, or a digital planner where they can kind of copy paste, and they have a routine set. Routine is so important for all kids, and teenagers and adults. So that's something that really, with school being back, that class structure is a lot more organized in the fall than it was in the spring. So that's a good thing, and still really difficult to kind of maintain it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the routines are definitely important, especially for the little guys. We've also found that setting timers or reminders have been really helpful, because it takes a little bit of the fight out of it for the parents. The device reminds the kids that they have to get on, and not necessarily the parent. So that's something that you could incorporate.
Yeah, if you've got a Google Home, Google's actually created bell routines, school bell routines for the Google Home, so you can actually set school bells throughout the day. So that can be something you can use. I think another thing that we sometimes overlook is the routine after school too. And I don't know if you guys have seen this with the kids you're working with in school as much, but certainly in doing the outpatient care, we've seen some of that where kids, they log off at 3 o'clock, and then they're either just burnt out from the day or whatever, and they need some good after school routine as well, which is a whole lot easier when we're not in the middle of a pandemic and there might be sports to go to or other things to go through to after school. And some of these kids are logging off of school and then logging right back onto their video games or whatever. Maybe their sleep hygiene isn't as good. But I think we need to, as parents, make sure we're creating that after school routine as well, so they're getting some variety to what they're doing.
Yeah, that's a great point, Matt, especially like non-screen activities after school. That's really, I think, important. Zoom fatigue is a real thing. I know I find myself more tired by the end of the day after being on calls or in classes all day long. And I think, and you have to be creative, because a lot of things aren't happening right now. There are some rec sports and club teams. So if you're comfortable doing that and your child's participating, that's, a break for some children. But I think, trying to really find ways to engage your child outside, especially as we're still in nice weather where we can be outside. The other thing you talked about, which is important, is the sleep hygiene. I think that's really has been a huge piece of the transition back to school. Essentially a 5-6 month stretch where things were kind of anarchy and you could just do whatever. And getting back into that routine, I know for myself, it was really difficult to force myself to go to bed earlier. So I was waking up earlier. And I know talking to my students, that was difficult and continues to be difficult. At my school, we're in hybrid, so we're in school 2 days a week and then online 3 days a week. So even that shift during the week, it proves to be difficult because they feel like it's the weekend sometimes, like a long weekend.
Mm-hmm. And I think for the younger kids too, knowing that there's a routine after school can, in a way, help implement the routine during school, right? They don't really switch off their routine. They're always at home. So if they always have a routine at home, then they can expect that throughout the day. And it could make it easier to follow a school routine since they are home that whole time too. And I would suggest, we have a very long lunch and recess break. So using that lunch and recess time to go outside and do things outside away from screens is very important as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, getting kids up and moving. There's not even like the movement between classes for the older kids anymore, right? At least there would be that 5 minutes in the hallway kind of battling against other people to get from one class to the next. Now they just stay in their room the whole time. There's not even that little bit of physical action. So yeah, I think getting outside is really important. A couple other practical things we had talked about when we were preparing for this are just students who are either new to a school who have moved, or students who have moved up. So they've moved up from elementary to middle or middle to high school. What tools are you seeing being helpful for them as they try and get to know their teachers and their classmates?
So
Go ahead,
we've
Lauren.
seen the best thing we've seen is just small group interactions. I've been pulling small groups of kids that are new in with a mix of kids that are not new, so that they can kind of meet and see faces in a small group setting and have an open conversation. So the classes are all, you have to be on mute the entire time. You have to raise your hand. It feels very formal. But when you meet with a counselor, or I know a lot of my teachers are doing small group Zoom meets, sometimes in the form of a lunch bunch, sometimes in the form of a, just another synchronous support section. Everyone can have their mic off, and it's just more naturally flowing, and that's been good for the kids. And it's also good for them to be with other kids who are new and see, hey, it's not just me that's brand new and trying to work through this. Again, with encouraging them to get outside, I'll ask them if they know kids in the neighborhood, if their families are comfortable with that. And some do and some don't. So it's really just whatever we can manage for them.
Yeah, similar in my experience. We're trying to be really intentional in terms of the programming we're doing. In my school, we have advisory groups. So, our new students are mixed with returning students. So, they're getting in small groups, getting to interact with a variety of students, which has been helpful. And even our teachers, we've encouraged them to really focus on social emotional learning during the class time, not just making it about the academic class, but doing some other types of activities to get the students talking to each other, and so they get to know each other and build community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all these things are so important. I mean, I know the topic for tonight is more the mental health, but some of these practical concerns are so important, because if we're not making sure that our kids are connecting to their peers, if we're not making sure that they have a good schedule, that they're sleeping well, that they're taking care of themselves, that they're being physically active, that's going to significantly impact their mental health, especially as we get further into this quarter. I don't know exactly what you all hear from parents and kids on a day-to-day basis. I know some of what I'm hearing in therapy is increased levels of depression, some increased levels of anxiety, but especially around getting to know teachers and teachers' expectations. But more of it right now seems to be about depression, fatigue, not really wanting to continue to do school this way. And that's got to look so different for you all as school counselors trying to help kids through that, but then also, okay, now go back to it. What advice are you trying to give to kids during the day as you're pulling them out and talking with them? Brad, you want to start this one?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I think it's perspective taking and making a shift in your head in terms of like where we are, and we're all going through it. The spring was so much different because we could see the end, but now the end of the school year, but into summer. But now we're starting, and we don't know how far it's going to go. So like we're in week 3 or so, and it's a big push. I think just reminding each other to give yourself grace in terms of what we're going through, that we're all in the same situation. It's not ideal. We just have to make the best of it. And self-care is super important. As you're referring to, Matt, like the rates of depression and anxiety, they've increased. We're facing this together, and it's just, I think self-care is so important, and acknowledging it, like seeing the signs and symptoms in ourselves, but also our more vulnerable ones, the young ones, and just making sure they're getting the support they need.
Mm-hmm. So for us, I can't say I've seen much of a spike in depression on my younger students, although the younger students express it much differently than some of the older ones do. We've had a couple who have refused to get on, who don't like the platform, and would rather be in school and voice that quite loudly. We have some really young ones just kind of melting down, if you will, when they've been on for a while. And that's a topic we can talk about later, because there's lots of different reasons that could be happening. But for the older ones, it's a lot of patience, a lot of grace, a lot of we're in this together. We understand you. We don't like it either. And just trying to really be empathetic with them and understanding with them. And then depending on the age, we can do incentives to get them on the computer. But with mental wellness, it really does have to be just a relationship building piece and a lot of communication with the parents too.
Lauren, you bring up a really good point that with the younger ones in particular, anxiety and depression can come out in really different ways that we're not, as adults, we don't normally think of. What are some of the things that parents should be looking for?
Specific to virtual, one of the things that I'm running into sometimes is just being on the screen and having all the faces looking at you. For a kid who is feeling anxious, that can be really, really overwhelming. So one of the things that I've been telling my students is to pin the teacher to the top. There are ways on all the different platforms that you can use a little push pin and pin the teacher to the top so that your teacher is the only one that you see. Because just feeling like everyone is looking at you all at once can really, really, some of these little guys are struggling with that.
I'm having a hard time with that right now, and it's just the two of you. So.
Yeah. And then work refusal is something to consider. I don't know, Brad, what else are you seeing for that?
Yeah, no, I think you raised good ones. Like lack of engagement could be a variety of reasons for that. Work refusal, getting behind in the work, just like lack of time management and organization. Behavior changes. I think kids that are typically more outgoing have become more reserved, or vice versa. Seeing more displays of anger and acting out, being grumpier, like mood changes, being grumpier or like snippier with teachers. So I think those are some signs as well that something might be going on. Now, one of those things doesn't mean anything, but if you see a pattern of different behavioral changes, like just sleep disturbance, eating disturbance, clinging more, wanting to be around adults more, there's lots of things that could, show that there is potentially something bigger going on.
And it's so hard to tell the difference right now too, because we all have this underlying level of extra stress because of the pandemic that adults, kids, we're all feeling right now. And I think for some people, there's like okay, we've been doing this for 6 months. This should be feeling a little bit more normal now, but it doesn't, and it won't. And then you add going back to school stress on top of it. And it's sometimes hard to parse out, well, which is causing this. And in the end, as a parent, I'm not sure it really matters for how we take care of our kids, where it's coming from, but recognizing that if our kids are losing interest in doing things that they used to like doing, if you're seeing crazy changes to their grades, those should be sending up some red flags for us.
Yeah. I mean, in my experience, it takes the good first quarter, so the late October, early November, to really get settled into the school year, and that's on a typical year. But with this, I think it expands beyond that to maybe into the holidays. And again, who knows, because all the news keeps changing. Are we going back? Are we going back for 2 days? We were going back, but now we're not going back. It's just stressful to go back and forth for everyone, and especially for children, because it's harder to have that perspective or just roll with it all the time. But at the same time, kids are much more resilient than we often give them credit for. they can kind of go with the flow more easily than I'm not an English teacher than adults. So
yeah.
I think that's another piece. Sometimes we don't see that stress as much in the kids, and we see it on the like adult faces that are going through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And what if you know that there's a kid out there who's dealing with some more depression, some more anxiety than they normally would, how would you coach a parent through helping them with that, Lauren?
Refer them to you.
This is when your website should come up.
That's right.
For us, a school counselor's job is very much that we see to the mental health of the kids so that they are able to succeed in school. So for us, when we refer out, is sometimes if there are things happening that, or if it's to the certain extent that we've tried what we know how to try and it's not working, or if things are happening outside of the school realm, then we'd refer out. But in terms of what we can do within the confines of our job, right, and within the confines of virtual learning right now, is having the kid connected as much as possible, right? That building family connectedness through spending time with them, not looking for ways or not doing it in a way that's punitive, or avoiding those conflicts and really just spending time, even if it's just reading a chapter book together or doing a puzzle or something that brings family connectedness. Looking for ways for community and school connectedness as much as possible to try and get them out a little bit more and support them that way, and helping them find some of those opportunities within the avenues that we have available to them. And then, we would see kids, my colleagues and I will see kids pretty regularly, just checking in. Hey, how are you doing? Are you able to complete your schoolwork? How, sort of like an attitude mood check, and then work with the teachers as well. Communicate a lot with the teachers on what they're seeing in the classroom, what the behaviors are, if they're able to be successful academically, or if they are really struggling academically, and where their mood is with those sorts of things. And as a counselor, just really kind of keeping a close communication between parent and teacher as well within the school setting.
Is it better, and this might be different at your different levels, is it better as a parent, if I see that my kid's really struggling emotionally, to communicate that directly to the teachers or to send that through the school counselor?
I think it depends on your relationship with the staff at the school and who you feel comfortable. So I don't know if it would look different. I don't know if it would look different in a different age level. I think it's who you feel comfortable reaching out to. And then if it's the teacher, then if the teacher, it's not something that the teacher feels like they can handle because it's over their breath, and then it goes to, I think they'll push it to the counselor. So I think what's important is that you're reaching out to someone and getting consulting and getting some guidance.
And I think it somewhat depends on, you said struggling emotionally. That could be a lot of things, right? Are they struggling emotionally because the work's too hard, right? That could be something that you would bring to a teacher's attention so that you can try and navigate it that way. And if the teacher needed more resources, they could reach out. So some of it depends on what the definition really is, or what the root cause really is.
And if it's like a relationship issue with that teacher, then, I think going to someone else would, again, depending, if you feel like you've tried reaching out to the teacher and it hasn't gone well, then getting another counselor or administrator involved to help kind of work on that piece of it. But I think the bottom line is to advocate for your child and reach out to someone at school that you feel comfortable with. And if you don't feel like you're getting a response, reach out to someone else until you get the response that you need to have.
Gotcha. Okay. Lauren, you brought up a really good point a minute ago that I wanted to circle back to, just about family connectedness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I think has been a real positive that I've seen with a lot of the families I work with over the last 6 months, is those families that are really being creative with this time are connecting more with each other than they have in a long time, because a lot of those extra activities that their kids might be doing aren't there. So they're having to play board games together, or read together, or go on walks, or things that they may not have necessarily been able to do. We've certainly seen that's been true in our family as well. And one of the things that I've seen as we've gotten back into school is kids need that it's really a precious time that we've been able to reclaim with our families. And especially with the uncertainty about school, having the stability of family relationships can be really important and really help through this transition. And I think sometimes our kids are smart and intuitive, and like Brad said earlier, they're really resilient too. And so the changes that are going on, they can deal with. They're stressed, they might be depressed, but they know they can deal with it, and B, they know we can't fix it. Especially when you get to the older kids, they know that there's nothing we can do to make this pandemic go away. I think as parents, we're so programmed to, we got to contact the teacher, we have to do this, we have to do that to try and fix it for our kids. And right now is a much better opportunity for us as parents to just say, let's just do something together. Let's just be together and have that comfort and that connectedness to help them recharge their batteries and get back to school.
Yeah, and I think it's even more important now that school has started, because the stress level is a lot higher in the home because the expectations are so much higher. And so you feel some of the stress between the parents and the kids of trying to get them to do their work and get on the meets, and parents are still working. And so the stress levels are a lot higher in the home once kids have to go back to school, which makes that family connectedness so much more important after school's done for the day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think sometimes you have to force yourselves to do it. People get busy. While we were stuck at home quarantining for such a long time, it made it easier because things slowed down and you couldn't go out really. But now that things have opened up, and I find myself being more distracted and pulled in different directions, and it's not as easy to spend that quality time. So I have to really force myself to do it. I know working, I ran, one of the other therapists and I at Crossroads ran a summer group. And it was a hybrid group. We had some in person and some online. And we had some sibling pairs that were in the group, and they talked about, typically they wouldn't spend a lot of time together, but this has forced them to spend more time together, and they've actually enjoyed it because they were it was the best of options available, and they found joy in each other. And, I don't think it necessarily created the best friends out of it, but I think they were spending more time, which was a good thing. And they enjoyed it. Yeah.
I love the way you say that. They actually enjoyed it. Like they were surprised.
Right. They were surprised. I can like my sibling. It's okay. But it was, even to the extent of some of the siblings were just thanking their other sibling, just saying how much they appreciated spending time. Usually the younger one to the older one saying, I like when you do spend time with me. So, I think it is real. It's maybe sometimes hard to admit, but I think deep down they do enjoy spending time with one another and as a family.
Mm-hmm. Couple other things that we marked down when we were planning for this is things that we've seen over the last few weeks. Panic attacks. Is that something that's been pretty common with kids over the last few weeks?
I don't know if common, but I know anxiety has, especially at my school where we actually did go back, we had a couple orientation days where students would come for like half a day to kind of, meet the teachers and get their stuff. And then we were in distance learning, and then we just started hybrid learning. So we're on campus 2 days a week right now. But I think we did see an increase of anxiety when we were first coming back on the campus. And I know in our high school, we had a student who had a panic attack as soon as they got out of the car. They just couldn't handle, because of the concerns of COVID, being at school. And then, the second day got easier and the third day got easier. But that I think there were students concerned about just what it would, just the unknown. What's it going to be like to be in a mask all day? What's it going to be like to stay 6 feet away from each other? I think that's, until you live it, you don't know what it's like.
Mhm.
Right.
We are still fully virtual. I can't say I've seen panic attacks from students that I haven't seen it from before, I guess. Being fully virtual. But I do see some of my higher anxiety kids struggle with the platform of virtual, like I said, of feeling like everyone's looking at you, or, if you put something in the chat box, you can't take it back. So it's better just to not do anything, or not respond, or not participate. So I have seen a little bit of that. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, we could spend a whole session, I'm sure, just talking about anxiety and responses to anxiety and how to help kids through it. But I think as parents start to notice those types of symptoms in their kids, just giving your kids permission to take a break, get away, take a few deep breaths, go for a walk, do things to help decompress, bring that stress down a little bit. But the other really important thing is also letting them know, hey, you can do this, and getting them back into it, because so many times dealing with an anxiety like that is, especially with an unknown, Brad, like you were talking about, so many unknowns, it's like that paper thin wall that you've just got to push through and get to the other side and realize, okay, I really can do this. Right. So, yeah. But we do need to be sensitive to it. It can't just be go, 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 do the next thing. We'll burn our kids out and end up making them more anxious. We've got to acknowledge it and give them that permission to decompress and then get back to it.
Mm-hmm.
Lauren, you were alluding earlier, you mentioned kids having meltdowns. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so again, at the elementary level, it looks different sometimes than with the older kids, but we definitely see kids or have reports from the parents of kids having meltdowns mid-session, refusing to get on in the first place, or just in general, just crumbling, right, with some of these online expectations and pressures. And it's new to them. They're not used to this. It's new to all of us. Mm-hmm. And so what Matt said, too, about giving them grace and patience and allowing them to step away. And then for the little ones, trying to get their their cognitive brain turned back on, right? Talking about something else first, playing a game, like, name animals that start with the letter A, to try and kind of draw them out of their meltdown before you try and even figure out why they're melting down in the first place. Because some of the young ones, you have no clue, and sometimes they have no clue. So you really have to try and get them settled down with thinking games before you can really kind of hash out, all right, what's the cause of this meltdown? Is it because the work is too hard? Is it because sometimes it's just because the platform isn't performing the way they expect it to perform? In our county, we're using certain programs that, sometimes the cursor drops the letter in the wrong place, and all of a sudden the kid's on the floor because they knew the right answer, but they got it wrong anyway. Is it fatigue from being on the screen for too long? There's so many different reasons why a kiddo could be melting down from virtual learning, but you can't hash that out until you're able to bring them out of it. So like I said, I end up playing thinking games, find me 5 things that are red, 4 things that are blue, and thinking of something completely outside of what had them melting down in the first place before you actually sit down and try and talk about it.
Distracting them.
So I have this glitter ball, right? This red, it's in my office, but I have this red glitter ball, and I show them out of context, well, obviously when they're not melting down, that when they are in one of these states, their glitter's all over the place. And so they can't think, right? Their emotions are going crazy and they can't think and they can't problem solve. And then we sit there and we watch the glitter settle to the bottom. And I use that to kind of show the kids, we need to get your emotions calm right now so that your brain can be clear and you can think again. So that's how I show my younger ones.
That's a great age appropriate way to talk about it. I know the experience. I have a first grader, and when she was in last spring in kindergarten, she's running the back. You might see her. You have glitter balls. She's all over the place. But she would have meltdowns when we were too involved. She's super independent. So when we were trying to overhelp, she didn't like that. She wanted to do it on her own. So when she got comfortable with the platforms, she essentially was doing it herself. And we would check over or be there to support her if there was an issue. But sometimes that's could be another possibility of the friction there. Mm-hmm. In the middle, upper school, high school realm, we're not seeing meltdowns per se, but it's more, I think, acting out in terms of making poor decisions in terms of things they might be saying or doing during the class. So, Lauren, you had referenced the chat. So, I've seen some inappropriate things going in the chat, or walking away from the computer and coming back 30 minutes later. Decisions like that in terms of just how they're behaving on camera, or what they're saying. So I think it's a little bit different, but it's like attention-seeking behaviors.
And you're seeing that out of the high school age kids, or more middle school?
Yeah, I mean more middle school, but I think high school again, ninth graders. I've heard doing similar things. I think thankfully as they get older, they're a little bit more mature and making better decisions. But yeah, more middle. I think maybe at the 9th grade, I think some of those maturity issues still exist.
I can't imagine. I mean, I just think back on myself as a middle schooler, and I was a fairly well-behaved middle schooler, but I made some boneheaded decisions. I can't imagine having the freedom to do chat and what might have come out of my fingers.
It's that digital citizenship piece too, right? That we are trying so hard to teach our kids, but and we've seen some of it in our upper grades with the chat, or with, like you said, seemingly attention seeking of saying or doing things inappropriate on screen, and some of it just comes back to it's not anonymous. It's not the anonymity, because we're all here and we can see each other's faces, but we're not right in front of each other. And so that digital citizenship piece comes into play too with this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lauren, when we were talking the other day, you made a really good point about how some of these behaviors too can loop back to grief. Mm-hmm. That this isn't just about anxiety about school. This isn't just about depression because things aren't the way we're used to. There really is a grief piece to this too, where these kids don't get to see their friends the way they want to. They don't get to interact with people the way they're used to. And especially, I think the kids who are starting and or finishing at a school, those kids who are starting 9th grade, who are starting 12th grade, 6th and 8th grade, the ones who are supposed to, this is supposed to be exciting. They're supposed to be either the big man on campus or they're supposed to be starting something new. And they've lost that experience. And there is some real grief to that. And Brad, since you brought up your daughter already, I guess I'll share a little bit too. One of my daughters is really struggling with the grief piece. and she went to a dance class and got to go and see some friends in person. And she came out of there with this huge smile on her face the other night. And just on our drive home, you could just watch her demeanor just go from excited and happy to, we're going back home. We're going back to everything that's going on. And you could just watch her face just kind of sink on the trip home. And it was so hard and so sad to watch, but that's that grief piece that our kids are going through that's so hard as parents to coach them through.
Yeah, because we're going through it ourselves. And it's a really real thing. And, Lauren, as you were saying the other night, it's not just grief around, losing someone in terms of like someone dying, it's grief in terms of, Matt, you were saying like those events or those just interactions that we're not having as much. And it's difficult. It's really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It is, yeah. Ambiguous grief is what we've been talking about in some of our professional developments, with the fact that these kids are losing time with their friends, time if they're not doing activities. And it's a hard reality of what we're living right now. And I think that's why some of the family connectedness and community and connectedness is also just so important right now, because that can help draw them out of it a little bit. Whatever you're comfortable with, doing little things can help here and there. Like Matt was saying, his daughter went to a dance class and that changed her mood for a little while. We have one neighbor near us that our kids do recess with, and that is just a little spark for the boys, but it's hard for everybody.
Brad, you brought up a really good point that this is something that as parents, we're dealing with it too, right? And this is probably a good time to transition and talk a little bit too about how, as parents, how do we deal with this? Because if we don't take care of ourselves well in the middle of this, and if we're not in tune with our own emotions, chances are we're not going to take care of our kids well. The other night, I guess the night before classes started, and my youngest daughter came to me, and she had thought she had gotten her login set up, and came to me almost on the verge of tears because she just thought she had her login worked out, and she had to wake up first thing in the morning and log in and get to class, and now her login's not working, right? And so it's like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. She comes to me on the verge of tears, and Dad, I need you to fix this. And fortunately, I had a decent day that day, so I was in a pretty good emotional state, because she came to me just in tears, and Dad, fix this now. And like, we're trying to work through it, and I'm trying to both learn it for myself and teach her at the same time, and deal with her emotional breakdown. And a couple times, like, honey, take a few deep breaths. Honey, take a few deep breaths. I need you to calm down. And finally, I had to look at her and say, honey, we're going to get through this, but you either need to walk away and let me figure this out, and then I will teach it to you, or you need to take a few deep breaths and we'll do it together when you've calmed down. And fortunately, she was able to take those few deep breaths. But, if I hadn't had a good day that day, I could have easily blown up at her. And, if I was in a worse emotional place, just could easily see that happening. And we need to do that as parents. We need to be able to check ourselves and know when we can help, and when we need to say this needs to wait, which can be really hard for us.
Yeah, I think something that came to my head is, and many of us are still working from home, so you don't have the commute time to decompress, or your kids are home with you, so you don't have the time away from them to have alone time, and so it compounds. As much as we've been speaking about the kids, but for adults, it's there's a lot of additional stressors going on, and in terms of dealing with your kids, dealing with work, dealing with other family things, dealing with finances. There's a lot out there, and then we haven't really talked about what's going on in the world right now. All those other lenses that we could be seeing things through. it's a very stressful time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lauren.
I was going to say, my staff talks so much about self-care. Sometimes I think they get annoyed with me talking about self-care all the time, but it's so important. It's also isn't always bubble baths and manicures. Self-care is also exercising and making that doctor's appointment that you don't want to make, and making sure that you pay the bills and all of those things so that you can feel like your life is a little bit more in order, so that you can have that little ounce of patience left. I've never had a very long commute to work, but it was nice, right? And I remember when my babies were little, just the 30 seconds between strapping them in the car seat, closing the door, and walking around to the front of the car to get in. It sounds horrible to say it, but those 30 seconds were like the most calming, peaceful 30 seconds of my day. Right? And I had to learn to use that time to take the deep breaths and to steady myself so that I could keep going. Right. And so it's finding those little things that you can really that you can do to really take care of yourself. And side note, what is it with logging in? Oh my gosh, the stress when they can't log in immediately is real. So we can talk about that another time, but that's a big one.
Well, they've never had to wait on AOL to dial up to the internet. It's always right there, right? But I also think we need to cut ourselves some slack. Lauren, like you mentioned, exercise. Yes, we need to exercise. That's so good for us too, right? But if in all the crazy, we only get 20 or 30 minutes in instead of going to the gym for an hour, that's okay. If we step on the scale and we're working out, but we're gaining weight, well, we're all under a lot of stress, and that does crazy things to our metabolism. So that's okay. Like, stop getting on the scale. Don't do it anymore until we're through this. So we've really, to Brad's point about giving our kids grace, we've got to give ourselves grace too.
Yeah. There's a great expression I heard in the spring. It applies for students, but I think also adults too. Right now life is full of veggies, no dessert. So I think it's we all want the dessert, right? But we're eating a lot of vegetables right now, but that that's okay. We can we have to find those little joys, those little pieces. And I think something that I try to do is practice gratitude to kind of help me get through it. And when I'm working with students, remembering what are all the positive things going on right now. What am I thankful for? There's a great activity I learned and I did with my daughter, who's 7. So you can really do it with any ages. It's called gratitude ping pong. So you kind of just go back and forth and say something that you're grateful for. And it was wonderful to hear what she had to say.
It's been interesting to me in working with families, because I think some of the families I work with who have the best perspective are almost the ones who've been hit the hardest by this, who have had someone who's lost a job or lost a family member because it puts things into perspective, and they've been through the bad stuff and have seen that they can make it through it. And it's almost the families that are so worried about, what if someone gets it? What if we lose our job? What if this? What if that? Who are in some ways having a harder time right now. I think as parents, we have to check ourselves and check our own anxieties to make sure we're not spilling it over onto our kids. Mm-hmm. I'll raise my hand. I'll claim that one.
Yeah. If we play the what if game, so will our children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they feed off of us. I think that's really important. Like, they're very intuitive. They see what they absorb what's going on, and it's important to remember that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, why don't we move on and talk just for a few minutes about some other special cases. and start with ADHD. It's got to be so much harder for those parents who have kids who have ADHD to set up their space and help coach them through this. So what are some things that you guys would normally do in the classroom for kids with ADHD that can translate to home?
One thing for us is flexible seating. So our kids with ADHD in school will often stand when they work, sit when they work, use a rubber band on the bottom of their chair to bounce their feet off of, or sit on, have the opportunity to get up and go sit on a beanbag chair, or, there are so many different even chairs that they can use, ones with the exercise ball or the wobble stools or something like that. So that's definitely something that parents can do at home, is find, a couple of different spaces with a couple of different, either different chairs or just different seating arrangements, so that they can have different feelings in their body as they're working, is one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think structure and schedule is important. So, not having expectations for your child to sit in front of the computer screen for an hour at a time. I think, again, it depends on the class schedule and the way the school's running it. But, I think being really realistic with, what is a chunk of time that a student can sit there without needing a break. So can your child sit there for a younger age, 20 minutes, older students, 40 minutes, and needing to get up, take a stretch, even if the class is still going on, just standing up and stretching, or if they're allowed to take a bathroom break and coming back, or like at the end of class, making sure that they're getting outside and running around, and not just getting on their cell phone or playing a video game, that they're getting some of that energy out, and refueling for the next 40, 50-minute lesson.
Yeah, I think snacks in between, or even snacks in class, right? They may not have been able to do that in school, but they can have a snack in their room, but if your family allows it.
Only if it's not chips. Chips on Zoom meeting is not a good idea.
Yeah. And I think setting up like what they're eating is important too, right? So making sure that they're getting a nutritious meal or protein to give them long-lasting fuel and not just a quick sugar high is also important.
Mm-hmm.
My kids are better at that than I am, so I can't say much there.
So one thing we try to do in schools working with our ADHD children is to be extremely intentional for when those breaks occur, right? To really, really know your kid and know when they've hit the limit. And most of them have patterns, right? Is it an hour after they eat that they start kind of crashing and burning? Is it, in the middle of math class? Is it in the middle of ELA? Kind of just spend a few days really zoning in and figuring out what your kids' patterns are, and trying to plan breaks and activities accordingly, and being real intentional with that is a big help.
Mm-hmm. And the older kids know it, they know what that is. They're pretty self-aware. If you sat down and asked them, what do you need? And I think sometimes letting them come up with part of that plan, there's more buy-in. So I think that could be a good technique as well.
Mm-hmm. Some of our ADHD kids do really well with heavy pressure tasks when they need a break. So I'm trying to think what that would look like at home. At school, what it looks like is we give a kid a crate of library books and say, here, the media center needs these books back, and they would take, have to carry this big heavy thing through the school. But sometimes just those heavy pressure exercises can be really good for them during their break times.
Yeah, bring the groceries inside, or bring the laundry or something like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I just lost my train of thought. Anyway, I'll think of it and come back to it.
The stimulus is so huge too for a lot of kids with ADHD. Lauren, you were mentioning getting up, moving to different areas of the room, changing stimulus around that way. But it's also a good opportunity. Some kids do really well, like if they're listening to a lecture or presentation, but if they're doing classwork, by having music on, having something else on in the background. So it gives kids an opportunity to experiment with different things like that they normally wouldn't experiment with. I saw a video this week of a dad who set his kid up with her bike on a bike trainer so she could just pedal her feet while she was watching her Zoom class. You can be a little creative with the kids who need that extra stimulus and do some things like that. It's also a good chance to be in touch if your kid is taking medication, to be in touch with your prescribing professional about that, either your doctor or psychiatrist, because kids are growing. Those prescriptions change all the time as they grow up anyway, and you add the extra stresses of right now and what's going on, and you might find that the medication that was working well last year isn't working well this year, isn't getting them through the whole day. So it can be a good time to consult with your prescribing professional there too.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say, was, setting timers. Timers can be really useful. We're going to set the timer for 20 minutes. You need to sit here and read for 20 minutes until the timer goes off. So that, I think that sometimes that's really helps focus children, is just knowing that they have a certain amount of time that they have to get it done in. Mm-hmm. And sometimes too much time is not their friend.
Mm-hmm. If your child is a fidgeter, making sure you have fidgets handy. Something that can happen easily at home that we've trialed at school before is chewing gum. Sometimes that helps them. It sounds funny, but sometimes chewing gum helps them to focus. So we've used that before in schools. And I would say, if your child has a 504, touch base with their team, right? They're going to have ideas for you. If they've been your child's 504 team for a while, they're going to know your kid pretty well, and know what works for them in the school building. And some of the things could probably translate home.
And I think just setting your child up for success in terms of where they, as we talked about earlier, where they are in the house, what distractions are near them. So whether it's too much traffic or too many electronics near them, I think knowing your child and what distractions they would fall to, or be distracted, what triggers are distracting them. So I think that's important to look at as well.
Mm-hmm. How about kids on the spectrum, kids with autism spectrum disorders? I know, and that's a really broad category too. So some things that are pretty general, but so many kids with so many different issues who fall into that category.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, building social skills can be really important for kids on the spectrum, and they're not able to practice that right now with other peers. But the flip side is they're not, some kids that have social anxiety, they're not having to be so anxious. So it's a tough one. There are, I know that, Lauren, I'm not in the county, so I don't know if what types of resources are available that you know of, but I know the Howard County Autism Society is a great local resource that I'm on the board there. So they have a ton of resources and support groups on the website. So that can be if you're not plugged into them, I would recommend that group.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a number of different Zoom support groups going right now, don't they?
They do. They have like young adult parents of support groups. So yes, if you go to their website, there's a ton of resources there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely reach out to those external resources for the support here. It's a really, really hard time for our kids that are on the spectrum, like you said, and some of it is just having the patience that they have a difficult time or can have a difficult time interpreting things through Zoom, so much more than they even would in person. So really opening up those lines of communication with their teachers that they're working with the support groups. It's a tough one for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I think self-care for the parent and guardian is super important. And when you're working with special needs children, because of just that patience you were talking about, like having the energy and the patience to be able to work with them, and making sure you're taking care of yourself so that you have that.
Yeah, I also think for those guys on the spectrum, really monitor their screen time too. And this goes to the ADHD too, that both those groups, the area of their brain that's already a little overstimulated gets even more stimulated by especially video games. And I can't tell you how many kids on the spectrum I've worked with who, they're in their chat room and they think they're participating while they're playing a video game, and they don't even realize just how distracted they are by the video game. They think they can do everything at once, and they really can't.
Yeah, I had a student, my mom emailed me saying that her 8th grade son, she busted him playing video games while in class, because when you're looking at the camera, the teacher can't tell what you're doing on the other side. You have multiple windows open, and she busted him, and she's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm just playing games while I'm in class." She's like, "No." She's like, "No." So she emailed me and we talked about it, and then the next day, the son reached out to all his teachers and apologized.
Good.
Made him apologize.
She walked him through how to do that.
Yeah.
Which I think is another really good point for that demographic, where you really do need to walk them through how to do certain things, kind of step by step, break things down more than you would think to, right? They don't necessarily understand that what I did in my math class and how I interacted with my math teacher, there's, may not be a one-to-one correlation to how I relate to my English teacher. So they don't necessarily make that assumption and association that we would. So sometimes you really have to spell out those expectations from class to class even. You might think that, hey, I walked you through what the expectations are for this class and how you have to sit there and do it, but you might have to walk through that 4 different times for all 4 different classes. And as a parent, that can be exhausting, but for those kids, it can be what they need, is really spelling out those expectations.
And these are all new expectations with Zoom too. So these are expectations that they have never encountered before.
Right. And it's interesting because I've seen, especially with the older kids who are on the spectrum, a lot of them understand screens really well, a lot of times better than their parents. And so they almost like get this one-track mind of, nope, I know how to do this. I know I've got it. I'm in the zone. And then they end up, losing this detail or losing that detail, or getting frustrated with their parents when their parents say, stop playing video games while you're in school. And it might take a few failures, and it might take those kids a few times of experiencing getting a really bad grade that they're not used to, before they go, oh, okay, maybe I really do need to listen to my parents and do these things. And right now, give them the grace to do that, and give them the kind of the rope to hang themselves a little bit, because sometimes it's better to let them get a slightly lower grade this quarter and learn that lesson than have that fight every day for, the rest of the quarter.
Yeah. Especially, I think, to be able to have those conversations in middle school before, you get to high school, is super important. Middle school is all about developing those skills, the study skills, executive functioning skills, so that when they get to high school and then, life after high school, it's really important to practice. And there's a safety net in middle school to take advantage of.
We're running a little behind on time, so I want to be sensitive to you guys. I appreciate the extra time you spent here. So real quick, are there other things that have to do with 504s and IEPs that you'd recommend to parents who have kids with those things that would help them right now?
I think just, again, advocating for your child. If you feel like their needs aren't being met, and they were, in the plan, things were outlined, communicate to the team saying, hey, this doesn't seem like this is happening. also being flexible and knowing that things are different right now. We're not in person, so things just kind of look different. It's only been a couple of weeks, but communication is super important.
Yeah, I was going to say, just never hesitate to reach out to your team, right? And ask questions. And a lot of the 504s that I case manage, we can't do all the accommodations virtually, but we are more than happy to consult on the ones that the parents can implement at home in different ways. So we are more than happy to talk to you. So yeah, keep the lines of communication open and reach out whenever you need something.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Lauren. This is a partnership. Not everything's happening at school during the day. At home, parents right now are the primary teacher in a way. And so like there needs to be that partnership. Things are skewed right now just because we're not in person. So I think it's really important to remember. And having positive intent, like I think everyone wants the best for the child. So just keeping that in mind, and there might be some friction, but I think at the end of the day, we all want what's best for the child.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also say have patience with the teachers too. My wife is a middle school teacher in the county, and she was telling me that on a normal day, when school's in person, she might get 5 emails from her students. And over the past week, she's been regularly getting about 50 emails a day from her students. That's just the student emails. That's not the teacher emails on top of it too. So, it's going to take them a lot longer to get back to everyone with all the concerns that are there, but they are working hard to try and do that.
Yeah, our teachers are working probably twice as long for this virtual to plan and everything and implement. We're all first year teachers all at the same time. So yeah. It's really rough.
I mean, yes, definitely. And I think one thought I would just put out there to parents is before you fire off that email, just let yourself calm down and look at it again a little bit later to make sure it's really what you mean to say. Because teachers they're human. They're going to drop things. Things aren't going to happen as planned. So just remembering that they're in a new realm here. Even though we started in the spring was chaos. So we're really starting over right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, if anyone is watching and has questions, feel free to type those into the chat room. I've got a couple from clients of mine to get us started. And if people have more, great. Otherwise, we'll wrap up after that. The first one comes from a mom who's got a elementary schooler who's A, really bright, and B, has pretty significant ADHD. And so it's the combination of he can't sit still during the day, and he's bored because he either zips through the stuff faster than anyone else does, or he's off in La La Land and never gets to it. And she was wondering, for a kid like that who's got that combination of ADHD and really bright, any tips for them?
One thing I can say, at least with the resources that Howard County has been using, is that a lot of the different things that the kids have access to, they have access to multiple grade levels worth of instruction or materials. So if we're talking about a really bright kid and the assignment is to, research hurricanes or something, they can use some of the resources meant for the upper levels through just what's already naturally provided to all the students. Something that is also a benefit of being virtual is that you can kind of make your own schedule in a little bit in one way. You obviously have to be there for the live meets, but when you do your asynchronous tasks, for a lot is really up to you. So knowing when your child performs the best and when they're able to focus is going to be a real, it's going to be advantageous, because you can create your schedule around your child then and what times of day they are better able to perform their tasks. So if they fall apart, or if they just can't focus after 1 o'clock, then do your assignments on Saturday morning instead of having longer school days. You know, at least for us, our assignments aren't due until Mondays. So use the time of day very wisely.
Yeah, I agree. I think at my school, I know our classes are being recorded. So the lessons are being recorded. So students can go back. If they didn't get it, they can go back and watch it. So if they're super distracted during class, they can, you know, go back and get that lesson. And the other flip side, where they're working ahead and they're flying through things, you know, enrichment, really authentic enrichment type activities can be a good addition without feeling like too much extra work, if it's authentic. So there's a coding program that we're using that we started using for our students, where it's like a game-like program where they're working. It's like an adventure. They're learning coding as they're trying to solve the problem, whatever it is in the game that they're playing. So I think being creative around finding supplemental materials that your child can buy into, that are fun, but also highlighting those skills, reinforcing those skills.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question is from another parent I work with, and they were wondering if your kid is getting so overwhelmed that they're starting to exhibit some self-harm behaviors, hitting themselves, banging their head against the wall, or you know, for some of the older kids, sometimes it's cutting. What do you recommend in those cases?
Call Matt.
I appreciate the vote of confidence.
I mean, I think if something's gone to that level, I mean, a school counselor can be a great resource, but that's not, I think, really in our realm, especially in this type of setting. I think that's a referral to an outside provider. And, you know, the school counselor has a lot of therapists in the area that they're working with other students. So they have, you know, easily can make some referrals to providers that you could connect with. But, I think it's a a quick stop at the school counselor or pediatrician to get a name of someone else to follow up with.
Yeah, and then if the concerns are related to the schoolwork, giving the counselor permission to talk to the outside provider. Most counties have forms that we use that allow that permission to happen, so that we can keep those lines of communication open. And if it is something going on in the building, or not in the building, but with school, we are better able to tailor to the kids' needs based on what the private provider has suggested.
Yeah, that goes back to the partnership. I think that's being, as open and with having that communication is really, really important. And, you know, in my experience, when I'm involved, you know, from the school side, I have permission to talk to the therapist. Things just resolve much easier because we can share the information. And I think the other piece of it, if the schoolwork is the trigger, you know, also talking with the teacher to figure out, you know, where there's a disconnect. Why is it causing the child so much anguish? Maybe sometimes and often it's a miscommunication, misunderstanding, and it just builds up and builds up and builds up. But it could have been a simple conversation that could have rectified it, but it never happened. That conversation never happened, so it just snowballed.
Yeah. Also, parents should know that 211 is a great resource in Maryland. Here in Howard County, 211 goes to the grassroots crisis hotline. I know this is something that the schools use. It's something that I use, and it's something that I recommend parents to use. So if your kid is really having an exceptionally bad day, and you're particularly worried about them hurting themselves, and you don't have time to wait to call and see who's available and get a session in with someone, call 211. That is the crisis hotline for the county. And if they think they'll do an assessment on the phone, and if they think it's appropriate, they'll actually send a licensed therapist to the house as part of the county mobile crisis team. And they go to schools, they go to homes, so they're used to working with kids too.
Yeah, we've worked with them for a really long time. And something else that they do is they will often offer for like 6 free sessions until the parents are able to smooth or iron things out with insurance, just to kind of get over that hump until they're in with a more long-term provider.
And something kind of switching gears a little bit that I do want to say, because we've been focusing mostly on school age children, but older children like in college or young adults, I've been reading some articles, that population is really having a difficult time right now because of COVID and the uncertainty of school and the future, and suicidality is gone up, suicidation, like thinking about suicide has gone up, and so has like anxiety and depression because of just that uncertainty. So if you have older children, out of college, please be really aware that that population is having a very difficult time right now.
Yeah, it's a good note. I heard an interview with someone with the National Suicide Prevention Hotline earlier this week, and they were saying that since this all started, their volume call has gone up about 30%. So definitely something for us to all keep in mind as we continue to go through this. Well, to those who are watching, thank you very much for staying with us. Lauren and Brad, really appreciate the time tonight. And I look forward to seeing you guys in person soon, I hope.
Hopefully.
All right. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for joining us, and have a good night.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Be safe. Take care.
Okay, we are no longer streaming.
I was just say, do I just sit here and smile until it turns